their foreplay technique. So they spoke to one another. He says, the first guy says, what I do, I kiss my wife all over, and she loves it. And anyway, she purrs like a cat, a pussy cat. The other guy says, that's nothing. I tickle my wife with a feather. She doesn't know what to do with herself. She goes wild. The third one says, my wife screams for 2 hours. Screams for 2 hours? He says, what do you do? He says, wait, I'm busy now. Wait, I missed something. Before she screams, he says, I coat her with olive oil. Every part of her body with olive oil. And after I finish, she screams for 2 hours. They say, well, how come? Why? He says, because I can't answer you. I'm busy now. They say, what are you busy with? He says, I'm wiping my hands on the curtain. A man walks over to the bed and he feels the woman's arms, legs, everything, and goes through her entire body, and then he says, then he stops. And she says, why did you stop? He says, I found it. I found the remote. Two Italian guys meet on a street. Giuseppe, Tony, how are you? Hi. How's the family? Fine. They're good, the grandchildren are fine. And he says to Giuseppe, how's your sex life? I hope I'm not embarrassing people by mentioning sex. So Giuseppe says, fantastic. What do you mean, fantastic? Every night, he says, I eat a loaf of Italian bread. It's like an aphrodisiac. It's terrific. It helps me considerably. Tony says, I think I'm going to try it. So he stands outside the bakery, and when the loaves come out of the oven, he says, I'll take 3 of them. And the girl behind the counter says, if you take too many, it's going to get hard. He says, God damn it, everybody knows this but me. Everybody remains or knows about Dear Abby. They used to write letters to Dear Abby, problems that they had, and she would solve it and write and respond in some fashion. One woman wrote her a letter. She says, Dear Abby, I'm having a terrible time. My husband has a libido or sex drive which is driving me crazy. She says, everywhere I go, he's behind me. I do the floors, he's there. I do the dishes, he's there. Wherever I go, he's there. What can I do? Signed, exhausted. P.S. Pardon the jerky writing. A farmer wants to propagate his herd. He has a bunch of cows, he wants to have more calves. So he goes to Minsk and he buys a prize bull. And he takes the bull and puts it inside the corral and watches. Nothing happens. The bull's not functioning the way he should. So he goes to the elder of his village, and he says to the elder, I don't understand something. When the bull approaches the cow from behind, it moves forward. Or if it stands on the left of the cow moves to the right. And when on the right, moves to the left. The elder thinks a moment, he said, did you buy the bull in Minsk? And the guy says, well, how did you know? That's absolutely amazing. Alas, said the elder, my wife is from Minsk. Let's see, what else can we...
You notice we're at a certain age, and
What?
I said, Do you notice we are at a certain age, way up, and every joke is sex, still.
A rabbi has served his congregation for 25 years. So they treat him, they provide him with an all-expense vacation to Hawaii. He comes into the room and he sees a naked girl on the bed. And he says, "This is terrible." He says, "Let me call the president of the congregation." He calls him up. He said, "Pincus, you've just insulted me. I have been a spiritual leader for 25 years, and this is the way you honor me?" He says, "You'll hear more of this when I come back." He hangs up, turns around, and the girl he's dressing. He says, "What are you doing?" She says, "I heard that you were mad." He says, "I'm not angry at you."
Sorry.
A guy wants entrance to heaven, a priest. So he goes to St. Peter. He says, "I'd like to have entrance." Peter says, "What are your qualifications?" He says, "I'm the leader of my parish. I've served you for many, many years. I'd like to enter." And St. Peter says, "I'm afraid you can't." He says, "But here's a wooden staff. Take it, that's all I can give you." A pilot comes up to St. Peter and says, "I'd like to have entrance." And St. Peter says, "Here's a gold staff, you can go in." So the priest comes back and says, "I don't understand him. I'm a servant of God, you didn't let me in, but you let the pilot in." St. Peter says, "It's very simple. When you give your sermon, they sleep. When he flies, they pray." Another pilot. This pilot has to land the plane because of mechanical trouble. So he asks the people to deplane. Everybody leaves the ship, the plane, except one person, Becky. So he comes to Becky, he says, he knows her. He says, "Becky, I'd like to have you deplaned like the other people." She says, "No, I'll stay here." She says, "But you could do me a favor." She's blind. "Here's my seeing eye dog. Do me a favor. Her name is Gertrude. Do me a favor, take her out for a walk." He says, "Sure, no sweat." So he takes the dog out of the plane, and they start to walk. He puts on his dark glasses, and he holds on to the harness. Well, the people who just got off the plane sees their pilot with dark glasses and walking with a seeing eye dog. And they all changed their flight. They couldn't tolerate this. A woman stands in front of a mirror and she says, "I wish I were 8. Her husband hears her and he says, "You know, her birthday's coming up. I'm going to surprise her." So the following week, he takes her to a carnival and they have cotton candy, they go on rides, they try everything. They come home exhausted. She says to him, he says to her, "Did you like it?" She said, "It was terrific, but I'm exhausted. Why did we do this?" He says, "Very simple. You stood in front of the mirror and you said, 'I wish I were 8. She says, "Dummy, size 8, not years." This couple went on vacation. They went on a second honeymoon to an island. He had checked himself out before, and the doctor said, "You're okay." Anyway, they go on vacation, and suddenly a second honeymoon. And secondly, he has a heart attack and dies. Well, they come back, a gathering at the home, and a friend comes over to his wife. She says, what happened? He was as healthy as can be. She says, I don't know what happened either. She said, we had a sexual interlude. He came and he went. Trying to go down the list. The grandfather goes to his son's house, his grandson's house, to visit. And while he was there, he goes into the bathroom, whatever, and then starts to rummage through the medicine chest. And he takes out a vial with some pink pills in them, unmarked. So he takes them out to his grandson. He says, what are these pills? Oh, he says, Grandpa, you wouldn't know from them. What does it do? He says, this enhances your sex life. He says, this wouldn't do you any good. And secondly, it costs $10 a pill. They're very expensive. And the grandfather says, well, can I have one? Sure. So he takes it. Grandfather, the next morning, the grandson finds a check on the counter for $110. He says, $10 is for the pill, and $100 is from your grandmother. In a retirement home, men are at a premium. A lot of women, few men. This guy says, I think I should take advantage of this. So he takes a sign, tacks it on his door, and says, sex for sale. So a woman sees the sign. Come in. What can I do for you? She says, tell me, I saw the sign. What are your rates? Oh, he says, 25 on the floor, 50 on the chair, 75 on the couch, and $100 for the bed. She says, wait, I'll write you a check. She writes her a check, she hands it to him. She says, $100 on the bed? She says, no. She says, 4 on the floor. A man comes up for naturalization, citizenship. He says, Judge, I want to have my citizenship. I know the president, I know the vice, I know about the Congress, I know about everything. But the trouble is, I don't talk too good. So I don't know, will I be able to get my papers? And the judge says, you talk any way you want. That's it. There are things about people getting the message. A woman complains to her husband, I don't know if I've exceeded my time, says to her husband, the boys use terrible, terrible language. I can't control them. He says, I will serve them tomorrow morning. Comes out tomorrow morning, comes in the morning, both boys are sitting at the breakfast table, and he says to the first one, I have some dry cereal, cornflakes. And the guy says, the kid says, I don't want those son of a bitchin' cornflakes. Oh, father hears it, picks them up, throws them against the wall, throws them down, throws them in a chair. He turns to the second one, and he says, and what will you have for breakfast? And the other son says, well, I love those son of a bitch cornflakes. Things aren't white that they seem what they seem. Anyway, there was a blind man standing at the curb with his seeing eye dog, waiting for the traffic to pass. The dog picked up its leg and urinated on the man's trousers. He reached into his pocket and he took out a bone. A woman came over to him and said, you know, I've never seen anybody with such compassion. You're really something. She said, you were standing there. The dog urinated on your trousers, and you gave him a bone. He says, that's right. You saw what happened. And as soon as I find his mouth, I'm going to kick him in the ass. Something so funny, isn't it? A guy went to temple, or to church, either way. And Mrs. O'Reilly, they got up for a prayer. And Mrs. O'Reilly got up. No, start another way. This guy came home with a black eye. And his wife said, what happened to you? He says, I'll tell you the story. Mrs. O'Reilly was standing in front of me at a prayer. We were all standing, and she had her dress in her cleavage. Now, people call it, it's the cleavage of your posterior. People call it an ass. In Jewish, they call it tuchus. He says it was in her tuchus. Now, who stands around with a dress in her tuchus? So I reached over and I pulled it out. And that's what she socked me. The wife says, I told you time and time again, leave things the way they are. Every time you touch something, something happens. So leave things. Don't change them. Says, okay. He goes back to the church or the temple. And who should be standing there but Mrs. O'Reilly? Now he knows that O'Reilly likes her dress in her tuchus. So he leaned over and he took the dress out and she socked him. He came home with 2 black eyes. End of story. I'm trying to keep them as clean as I can. Some of them are not necessarily GP.
You're doing fine.